learned that I didn't have to be the smartest guy in the room. I didn't have to know all the answers. I had to hire really smart people that we could learn from each other. Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you in the different areas of the business that you need to run. In fact, you're the leader, and they're going to help you look like a great leader.
Welcome to our 6th episode of Leading with Relevance. This is a podcast series featuring some of today's most prominent leaders, people who are busting through the status quo, I like to say, and impacting companies and communities. Our goal is to interview and highlight the personal and professional journeys of the people that we were interviewing. For the listeners, we think there are, and I've seen it in my first several podcasts, practical insights that you can apply to your pathway of leadership. I'm Tino Mantella, the Chief Strategy Officer for Relevance, and I'm loving the opportunity to talk to leaders. I'm actually learning so much by putting my curiosity hat on, and there's no better way to do it than do these podcasts. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing and interviewing my friend Michael Coles, who's the co-founder of American Cookie Company back in 1977, the Great American Cookie Company back in 1977. He's a former CIO of Caribou Coffee. He's written a book called Time to Get Tough. By the way, it's not the only title like that. I might ask Michael about that. He's an athlete. He set 3 transcontinental cycling records. He's a survivor of a near-death experience related to a motorcycle accident. And one of the things that you'll find very interesting, he's a man that's gone from poverty and adversity to leadership to philanthropist. Him and his wife have the Michael J. Coles Business School. They have an endowment for veterans and do a number of other great things. He's a great keynote speaker. I've heard him speak before when I ran the Technology Association of Georgia, a nonprofit leader who's former chair of the Georgia Film Commission, University System of Georgia's Board of Regents, and a mentor to young people. So that's a lot. Michael, welcome to Leading with Relevance.
I got so tired hearing that.
I got pooped out just reading all about you.
It's been nice. It's nice to be with you again, Tina.
Yeah, it's been a while. So let's just jump right in. I'd love to ask this question first, and you probably, of all the people I've interviewed so far, when I asked the question, what shaped you the early part of your life? You were in Brooklyn, you were in Buffalo, you were in Miami, you were in middle class, you were in poverty. One of my favorite songs when I was in college was That's Life by Frank Sinatra. And it seems like you've sort of gone on that journey. So tell us about the things that you feel most shaped you during those early years.
Well, I could take up the whole 20 minutes.
I know.
So I'll try to make it brief. Yeah, I up until I was about 10 years old, I mean, I had a pretty not normal life. I had a pretty good life. I mean, my father, I would say our family was upper middle to upper middle class. And I came home from school one day when I was 10, and there was a panel truck sitting outside my house, and all of our belongings were on it. My parents notified me that my father had gone bankrupt, and that my dog, I had a dog, a little black Cocker Spaniel named Lucky. She was in my wagon with her food and her dog bowl. My parents had arranged for me to take her up the street to give her away because where we were moving wouldn't allow pets. I know everyone out there can imagine what that must have felt like for a 10-year-old kid. But the family had an 8-year-old boy, and I couldn't let him see me cry. So I just kind of sucked it up and delivered my dog and came back to the house, and we moved to an apartment. And the truth is that it didn't seem that different from where we lived, other than the fact we had our own house. We had a big backyard. I had a lot of friends, and now we're in a new neighborhood with no backyard and no friends. But that came around together, and we had our furniture and we had all of our stuff. and it just didn't seem that different. Anyway, my dad thought he would recover, and so he never really stopped spending. And so 3 years, almost 3 years in, I was about 12. My dad, his wages were being so badly garnished that we literally had to move in the middle of the night. They sold everything they had. We packed everything up in a car and we drove to Florida, which was a debtor's state where my father felt like he could start over again and they wouldn't be able to garnish his wages. And so we moved to a horrible apartment. I mean, we had a beautiful apartment in Buffalo. We moved to this less than 300 square foot apartment, one
Wow.
bedroom, one bedroom. My parents had to sleep on a screen porch in Miami. There was no air conditioning in this apartment. I had to share a room with my sister, who I did not get along with then or now. And
Oh,
um, literally, I woke up that morning again, almost 13. And if you ask what shaped my life, it was looking around this place, which was really horrible. Cockroaches and big palmetto bugs and hot and miserable. And it was the worst feeling I had ever had in my very young life. And I had to make a decision. And the decision was, do I accept this as a temporary situation? Or is this the new reality? And do I need to get a job and help my family? And I chose to get a job and help my family. It wasn't for money to go to the movies. It wasn't for money to buy some stuff for myself. It was basically go to work and then hand the money over to my dad. My dad never recovered. He wound up he wound up doing okay, got a good job. But pretty much, we kind of lived at that point paycheck to paycheck. And if anybody asks me what drove me or has driven me my whole life, it has been the fact that I never wanted to ever again have that feeling again that I had that morning. And I not only got a job, I wound up I was seventh grade. I wound up getting 3 jobs. I worked weekends, I worked days, I worked nights. Back in those days, kids could get jobs like that. And
yeah.
I had those jobs. And so I'd say that every bit of success I've had, if you want to call it that, in my life, was all due to that day.
Yeah, it's interesting because my next question it was, and I'll ask it, but you've sort of answered it to some degree, and it's got to be hypothetical. But if you had a normal childhood and didn't lose everything and had to start work at 13, and I think you said in one of your interviews that you kind of resented that a bit as well, but you did it
Yeah.
because it had to be done. But you think you would have taken that path of success that you ended up taking and just being, stubborn and scrappy? I guess we talk about what shapes a person, sometimes it's adversity, but how would you answer that?
I don't think my life would have turned out as well, honestly.
Yeah,
I think I think the fact that I met a guy named Irving Settler who owned a clothing store and hired me at 13 and took me under his wing and was my incredible mentor and taught me about business and taught me really about life. He and his wife, when my family never went out to dinner, they would take me out to dinner. They would talk to me about placement of silverware and the glasses and all these different things that I learned as a very young guy. And the big thing that Irving gave me was a sense of my worth.
yeah,
And I don't know how I would have gotten that. Maybe I would have gotten it, but sometimes if you want to change it, would you change anything in your life? I always have said I will. I'm sure there's lots of things I would change as long as you tell me I'm going to wind up in the same place.
yeah,
Because if I change something and I don't wind up where I am, I don't want to change anything.
yeah. Well, the store is called Mr. Eddys, right? And I loved
No,
what.
no, no, that was
Oh,
in Chicago. No,
okay,
it was Darwin's in Miami.
okay. So that's where you started.
That's where I
Yeah.
started.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things, just going back, I grew up in Cortland, so Cortland, New York. Not many people listening would probably even know Cortland, but you do because you were in Buffalo. So one thing is it probably wasn't too bad to get out of the gray and the cold and the snow and in the
Well, I
Buffalo?
will tell you, we drove obviously to Florida, and I had visions of young girls in bathing suits on my way down. And I thought, and leaving 5 feet of snow in Buffalo. I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to palm trees and sun.
You never got
And
to see them.
no, yeah, my life turned upside down pretty quick.
How did you get, so you were in Florida, and then how did you get connected with the Chicago store, Mr. Eddys? And then I'm going to ask you, and you can kind of segue right into that, because you were already spunky, you were already so confident in yourself because you wanted more money from the man, and you said, "Don't pay me for 4 weeks." And
Right.
negotiated. So talk about that whole story and your big sale, but how did you get there, first of all? I love that story.
Yeah. I love telling that story. It was a big turning point for me. First of all, I got married when I was 20. And my former wife, who I was married to for almost 8 years, her family was from Chicago. And there was just really nothing for me in Miami anymore. I was saving money to go to college. And she came from what I would say a fairly normal middle class family. And I didn't have a close relationship with my parents at that point. My dad was a very angry man at that point, I mean, just
Yeah.
it wasn't good. And so I knew taking a break and moving up there would probably be really good for me. But when I got up there, I had to continue to save money to go to school. And so I went looking for a job, and I was 19. Oh, I guess I got married when I was no, I was 20. I was 20 when I moved up there. So I got married when I was 20. I moved up there. I had some money saved, but not enough. And I went to look for a job. But when I was 20, I looked 12. I mean, that's no joke. I looked so young. And so Mr. Eddy, and then at that time, that store was called Mr. Junior,
Okay.
but it was owned by a guy named Eddie Pillay, who was an incredible guy. And he said to me, we sell this is 1965, 64. This is 1964. We were selling young kids suits that were $100.
Oh, wow.
And and that would probably be like selling a kid today a $600 or $700
Yeah.
suit. And so he looked at me and he said, no one is going to take someone that looks like you serious enough to buy from you, to buy this expensive clothing. And he knew Irving because there was a fairly tight group of entrepreneurs that
Okay.
were all in this young fashion business. But anyway, he said to me, "Well, I talked to Irving. He said you're a very honest guy." He said, but he didn't tell me much more about you. I said, "Look, I'll tell you what. I'll go to work for you for 4 weeks. You don't have to pay me a penny. At the end of 4 weeks, if you think you want to hire me, you got to pay me $200 a week." And he
Right.
said, $200 a week. He said, I don't pay my managers $200 a week. I said, well, look, then you got a great deal. I'm honest. I won't steal from you. But at the end of 4 weeks, you either hire me and pay me 200 or don't pay me anything and I'll go find a job somewhere. And I said, what do you got to lose? So he said, okay, we'll show up at Skokie Avenue store. And he gave me
Oh,
the
yeah.
address. Anyway, so I showed up, and the first week I was there, Eddie was fanatical about the store staying neat. He walked in the store, and there were something like 16 pieces of clothing, sport jackets, suits, shirts, ties, socks, underwear, everything you could think was piled up on the counter. And then he came walking in and he was so upset. He walked in and he looked at me and he said, who put all that stuff on the counter? I said, I did. He said, well, you better put it away. And I said, it's all sold. And he was speechless. He didn't know what to say. It was the biggest sale ever made in the store. It was almost $3,000
Yeah.
sale back then.
Which is worth a lot more today.
A lot more today.
Yeah.
And he hired me on the spot that day and
Yeah.
paid me $200 a week.
How did you get that confidence, given was it something you just felt like you had to do? You had to make more money, so you just going for it, or?
Yeah, I think that was part of it, but I knew what I needed to make. I mean, I only had when I got up there, I only had about 4 or 5 months before I was going to go away to school. So I knew what I had to save. And so I had to get a job that would pay me kind of that money. Or I was gonna have to get two jobs. And look, I was a street smart kid,
Yeah,
I didn't have anything, so I had nothing to lose.
nothing to lose.
And so it was easy to make the offer. And honestly, if he had come back and said, I'll pay $150 a week, I probably would have said, okay. Because that's really what I wanted was $150 a week. But I figured I had asked for two. So, and we had a great relationship, even after I left him. For years and years and years, we stayed in touch with each other, as I did with Irving.
Yeah. Wow. So you stayed in clothing for 19 years, I think. Is that right?
19 years, yeah.
And then you shifted to somehow into the
The
Great
cookie
American
business.
Cookie Company. So how'd you
Yeah.
make that transition? And I want to hear the story about starting with the $8,000 investment.
So I had started a company. Well, let me go back.
Okay.
So I wound up having a very successful career. I never went to college because I got offered a job. I was supposed to start college in January of 1965. And I got offered a job with a very big company at that time that offered me a job as a trainee with the intention that once I learned the ropes, I would get my own territory. And I went and interviewed, and they offered me the job. And I came back and told the guy who had recommended me, I said, I just don't know if I want to do this. I really want to go to college. And I had already had to get my counselor from my high school to change my start date from September of the year before. And because I was going to go to school in Miami, and now I was going to go to school in Arizona State. And I got my counselor to call them and get them to accept me for the January session. And so I said, I just don't know if I can get them to change it again. He said, look, take the job. He said, do it for a year. And if it turns out you don't like it, then go to college. He said, but if you're going to go to college, he said, when you get out, this is the kind of job you're going to try to get. So why don't you at least try it? You may find out you don't even want to do this and do something else. So that seemed pretty logical to me
Right.
at 20. And so I called my counselor, told him what was going on, and he got me a 1 year extension at the Arizona State University. And so I went to work for HIS. I did very well. I got a territory at the end of 5 months. It was the worst territory in the company, 65 territories. Mine was number 65.
Wow.
In 2 years, I turned it around to number 3 in the company. I won a big sales contest. I had Western Michigan. I asked my boss, because the guy in Detroit had just his territory was cut down to one company. And I told him I wanted the whole state of Michigan. I was 22 years old. And he said to me, you're too young. No one in Detroit will take you seriously. It had a very familiar ring to it. It sounds like I was talking to Eddie Pillay. I said, well, if you don't give me the whole state of Michigan, I'm going to quit and find another job. And he said, I can't give you the state. No one will take you seriously. You're too young. I said, look, just give me the state. I'll hire someone for Western Michigan. They can work for me. And I said, and I'll take the thumb of Michigan, and I can turn, because it was doing terrible. I said, I can turn it around just like I turned around Western Michigan. And he said, nope, you're too young. I said, well, I'm just telling you now, Bob, if you don't give me this territory, I'm gone in January. And he said, you're not leaving. You're not going anywhere. You're just starting to make money. And so I got another job, and he called me in December. Yeah, well, I called him. I said, hey, the new line just got delivered to my house. What do you want me to do with it? And he said, what do you mean? What do I want you to do with it? I want you to go out on the road and sell it. And I said, I got another job. And he said, what do you mean you got another job? I said, Bob, I told you, if you didn't give me the whole state, I was going to leave. And he said, don't go anywhere. And he got on a plane, came in the next day. Make a long story short, He started looking for somebody to hire. He hired someone. And I took this job with this company called Mail out of Atlanta. And I moved to Detroit, and I was extraordinarily successful, so successful that the stores in Detroit, the major stores that were running full page ads on the company, every time they ran a full page ad, I would send a copy of it to Bob Lures, who was my boss at the time, with a little note on, said, "You're right, they'll never take me seriously." And by the way, he and I stayed the best of friends till he died. I went to see him many, many times. He became a great friend, and it's a long story about that. But anyway, so that job led me to go to Atlanta, which I always wanted to live in Atlanta. And so I wound up moving to Atlanta and went with Mail. And then I left Mail and I started a small chain of clothing stores, discount, kind of the branded discounted stores of today. This was back when it was first starting. And so I started this chain of stores and the stores did great. They did lots of volume, but I made no money. And I wound up going bankrupt.
Oh, wow.
And I wound up going bankrupt. And for about the first 90 days after the bankruptcy, I blamed everyone around me for the bankruptcy. And then one morning I woke up and said, "You got nobody to blame but yourself." And I started doing a lot of self-evaluation as to what happened. Why did this company go out of business? Why didn't it make it? It was doing so well. And I thought to myself, I'm going to go back in business someday and I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm never going to make those mistakes ever again. So I had to go back to Mail, where I came from, with my hat in hand. I started a new division for the company. There was a bunch of stuff that happened. I did okay. And then I decided with a buddy of mine that we would start a company on our own called the Great American Clothing Company. And so I did that for about 10 months, 11 months. We did very well. My partner and I had a big disagreement how the company should grow. And I basically told him I was leaving to go on a trip to San Diego for a clothing show. And I said, "Look, when I get back, we got to figure out a way to separate. I can't do this anymore." The other thing that was going on at the same time was that the clothing industry, which had moved to the South, was now moving overseas to Asia. I was traveling 3 days a week. My kids were very young. I knew 3 days a week I was missing a lot of their lives. And now I was going to have to be gone 3 weeks a month. And I just said, I don't want to do that. I'm going to find something else to do. And so I was out in California and I saw a cookie store in a mall. I went and stood in the line to buy cookies, and I couldn't believe the line. I couldn't believe the price of the cookies. Back then they were expensive. They were like 35 cents a cookie. And I talked to the store manager and he told me how much revenue they were doing and what their food cost was. I didn't believe any of it. It just sounded all too amazing.
Good to be true.
So, yeah. And so I bought some cookies and I bought other stuff to serve clients that were going to come in and look at the line. I went to a grocery store and bought all the ingredients to make my mother's chocolate chip cookie recipe. And then I went to a pharmacy and I bought a postage scale so I could weigh out all the ingredients to figure out the food cost. And I had a kitchen in the suite I was staying in, and I made my cookies and weighed everything out. And by God, I couldn't believe the food cost based on a 35-cent selling price, how amazing it was.
Margin, you mean?
Yeah, the margins were incredible. And there was no inventory. Basically, there's no inventory.
Right.
And I was in a business that was intensely inventory.
Yeah.
So I came back, Donna picked me up at the airport, and I said, "Look, I'm going to sell my interest to my partner. And while we're figuring out what we're going to do for the rest of our lives, we're going to open up a cookie store, and just so we can have some income." And so it turned out I called a friend of mine who was also in the clothing business. And because I was giving up the sales end and marketing end of a company, I thought he might have an interest in he had a sales agency, of taking over the sales agency for the Great American Clothing Company. And when I called him, he said, "Why are you leaving? You guys are doing great." And I said, "Well, I got this idea of while I'm figuring out what to do, I'm going to open up a cookie store. And he said, "You're kidding." He said, so his wife, Susan, made the best chocolate chip cookies I've ever had in my whole life. She always served them at the shows and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so they were literally working on the same idea. We got together, we put our two plans together, it made a fit. And we put $4,000 in each. We went to CNS Bank and borrowed $25,000. And CNS Bank, I will never forget this. CNS Bank was so confident that we were going to fail that they sent out a forensic accountant to both of our homes to inventory all of our personal assets.
Oh, they were ready
So
to take it to
so,
cleaners.
so that when we failed, not if we failed, when we failed, they could just go in and auction all that off and get their money back. And
Wow.
so that's how we started. We signed a lease, which was with Perimeter Mall.
Yeah.
It was $25,000 a year rent, 10-year lease. We had to personally guarantee it's $250,000. And both of us kind of looked at each other because honestly, we didn't know anything about the cookie business other than what we researched. And just knowing that if this business failed, we were going to be bankrupt. We would have
Yeah.
been gone. And so we opened up our first store. I mean, it's a long story about we almost went out of business on the first day because we burnt the first batch of
I was
cookies.
going to ask you about that. I remember you telling that story
Yeah,
at an event I
yeah,
attended.
yeah.
Just quickly on that, your first batch was
Yeah,
people were lining up, right? I remember
yeah,
you
right.
telling
And they're watching the
for
cookies
free.
bake. They're watching the cookies bake. And
Probably smelled great
yeah, they started burning.
until they started
And
burning.
when we opened up I mean, literally, when we opened up the oven door, smoke was pouring out of the oven. We were on a combined air conditioning system with Park Lane hosiery. Smoke was pouring out into the mall. The fire department came, and the guy, Jeff Weil, who had given us this big break by letting us open up a store, he just looked in and said he could have really, at that moment, he could have
Shut you
uh,
down.
canceled our lease. And if he
Yeah.
had canceled our lease, we would have been on the hook to CNS Bank and we would have been on the hook for the lease. But for some reason, he just looked in and said, "Is this what it's going to be like every day, guys?" And we try to reassure him one more time. But anyway, we opened the next day with incredible success. But 6 weeks after we started the company, I had a motorcycle accident on my way home, and I woke up in Northside Hospital with two doctors standing over my bed telling me I would live, but I would probably never walk normally again. I would always need some type of aid, either canes or crutches. And here we were with this brand new business, and I couldn't even drive myself to the mall. And so, and I also, if there was a thought in my head with Donna about what I was going to do with the rest of my life, all those things went away because this is back in the days before, the ADA. You couldn't go interview on a job,
Yeah.
especially a C-suite job, on a walker or crutches. You'd be laughed out the door. And so I had to focus on the cookie business. And that
Yeah.
one store wound up being several hundred stores.
Right. Sold it for 100 million. We'll get to that. But I think it's a good place to pause and say, a lot of what you've been talking about, whether it's telling Mr. Eddys to, don't pay me for 4 weeks, I'll show you what I can do. And then, I'm going to open a cookie company, from clothing. I don't really have a clue about cookies other than you like the chocolate chips. So what would you say to entrepreneurs about like being bold or, taking that major leap or, how do you think about that?
So here's the thing, Tina, over a lot of years, and especially when I was writing my book, I had a lot of time to reflect on my own travel, my own journey. And one of the things I realized, I had always been in very disruptive businesses. Uh, because back in the day when I started with Darwin's, There was no young men's business, young women's business. It was just blooming. It was just starting. And it was disrupting all of the traditional clothing companies. And the same thing when I went to work for Mr. Eddys or Mr. Junior at the time. It was the same thing. He was a disruptor. He's selling young kids that were about to be, confirmed or bar mitzvahed, $100 suits back in the day. I mean, it was
Yeah.
this, where most department stores would be selling suits that were $30. He's selling suits for $100. And so, and then, when I went to work, with Mail, it was a disruptive company. It was disrupting the jean business at the time because it was dominated by Wrangler and Levi, and it was three colors and maybe corduroy. And then comes this young startup of a company that's making jeans and colors and different fabrics and different fits and styles. And so a lot of people wouldn't think about this, but when we started the cookie company and the way we did it, it was virtually a clothing store that was selling cookies because it had lots of inventory. We had suggestive selling. We had smiling people on the front counter, and it was disrupting the bakery industry. It was disrupting the cookie industry, which at the time, if you wanted a warm, fresh cookie, the only place you could get it was basically at a bakery or at home, and the
Wow.
bakery cookies were terrible.
Yeah.
And so that industry was disruptive. And I think we succeeded, frankly, because we didn't know what the hell we were doing. And all we knew how to do was basically run a retail business.
Yeah.
And so we ran that cookie business like a retail store.
Well, that makes sense. But along the way, early years, you were an independent guy doing sales, business development. Now you have a business, and now you have 100 stores. So talk about
400 at the end, by the way.
Over 100?
400 at the end.
400. I'm sorry. 400 stores. That meant you had a lot of employees.
Yeah.
So you've talked about how you found that retention and job satisfaction isn't about money, it's the most important thing. And you talk about the culture. Pretty much everybody that I've talked to in these leadership positions talks about culture. So, with 400 stores, the importance of retention, job satisfaction, what's your philosophy around how you built that culture? Hope, you'd have similar culture across all 400 stores because it's the culture that you built.
Well, first of all, remember the cookie company was a franchise business.
Okay, so you did the franchise, yeah.
So it was a franchise business, and we wound up when we had close to 400 stores. We only had about 60 franchisees.
Okay.
So most of them were multi-unit owners.
Okay.
But the important part of that is that we, in the beginning, and like a lot of startup franchise companies, the people you first bring in aren't necessarily the people that are the best people to build your franchise, because you wind up bringing people in that are too much like yourself. And people that are too entrepreneurial should not be in the franchise business because
they want to do their own thing.
They want to do their own. No, don't buy a franchise. Why are you going to pay me a royalty if you can do better than I can? And so, because we're going to tell you how to run it by the book. And we wound up with a very close-knit franchise group who all bought into the vision of what this company could be. They ran their stores as close. Some ran them better. Many ran them better than we did because they were closer to the operation. But they understood, the philosophy of the company and what later became, the mantra was just share the fun of cookies. And that didn't just mean the customers, that meant our employees, that meant our vendors, that meant anybody that touched the business.
Yeah.
We wanted them to have fun with it. And it created, an atmosphere where we trained people behind the counter, and then we would train them in front of the counter. We would show them what bad cookies look like. If you're going to bake bad cookies, you don't want to serve bad cookies. You only want to do the very best. We want this to be the best experience anyone has ever had walking into a cookie store. And we ran, I think from the very beginning, we weren't trying to be the biggest. We were just trying to be the best.
Yeah.
And I think that that is the guiding point, and I got a lot of that from my old boss, Irving, who was crazy about customer experience. And yeah, so.
Well, you were kind of ahead of the game with now they talk about customer success, customer experience, focusing on the customer. And there's a lot of discussion around persona. So, did you have a particular profile you were looking for these 64? I mean, what made a great franchisee? Was there certain characteristics or?
I would say this, they were all they were very entrepreneurial,
Okay.
and they wanted to be in business. And the philosophy of our company was, this is an opportunity to be in business for yourself, but not by yourself.
Got it.
So they were coming in knowing that they could come into this company. We would show them how to do things, but if they had suggestions on how to do something better,
Uh-huh.
we would listen. If they had product ideas, we would listen. It didn't mean we always did it, but when we re-engineered the whole company back in 1985, we brought 5 franchisees into the process because we were doing a revamp of the whole company. And we knew, or I should say, I knew that I could not stand on the podium and sell it to the franchisees, because
Yeah.
it would be like, Goliath is telling them what to do. But their peers, those 5 peers that we did it with, who
Yeah.
worked with us on it, they got up and told them how great this was. And so everyone bought into it.
Yeah. That
And that
makes,
big change of the company is why the company is still around today.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, everybody listening knows it's not all a bed of roses. So did you have a big challenge that you had to overcome that you want to talk about?
In the cookie business,
Yeah,
or
in the cookie business. Or was it all like a straight rocket
oh
ship?
no, no, no. We had plenty. Yeah, we had plenty of challenges. I mean, the fact of the matter is as a company grows, um, just things that come up. We had uh, batter issues. We had financial issues
Yeah,
where, we just none. Listen, I will just tell you this: there is no such thing. Maybe there is for some people,
yeah,
but no one that I've talked to that has ever gained any kind of success will tell you that it's a straight line.
yeah,
And it's the bumps in the road that I think change the trajectory of the business. Is the things you learn from the things that go wrong. And one of the things I always talk about is the fact is that it's how you deal with the unexpected that really changes the projection of a company. Because anyone can lay out a business plan. They can try to figure out everything that they need to do and everything that can go wrong. But the bottom line is, if everything worked like that, everybody would be successful.
yeah.
It's the unexpected that'll kill a business.
No, that's kind of what I wanted the entrepreneurs to hear that are listening, that yeah, it's not a straight line. But you figure it out, and sometimes those toughest things that you have to do are the things you learn, which kind of is, I think, a lot of your life stories. So you talked about your motorcycle accident, near death experience. You told you couldn't walk, and that led you, I think, to dedication to cycling and
Bicycling,
holding
yeah, bicycling.
bicycling and holding some records. So talk about like the training that you had to do and how you said, well, you're not going to be walking with a cane all your life. You're going to figure out how to do it. So tell us about that story.
So about 9 months after my accident, we lived in Kennesaw, and we had a very steep driveway at our house up to the mailbox. And my daughter was 3 years old at the time, and she said to me, "Let's race to the mailbox." And I figured even on 2 canes, I could
You
I
could
could
beat her.
beat her up the driveway. And when I took off to run, the pain was excruciating. And it was virtually the first time since my accident that I realized I was disabled.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much disabled in my legs, it was disabled in my mind, because it was the very first time in my life that doctors had told me what my limits were, and I believed them. They
Yeah.
basically went, it's a different world today than it was in 1977.
Yeah.
As far as when you were 30, I was 33 years old. And at 33 years old, with the accident that I had, if they could get me walking on two canes, that was fine. I mean, that was like good enough. There were
Yeah.
no gyms back then. People weren't running back then. People weren't riding bikes. It was just a different world. And so I walked my daughter up to the mailbox. And when I came back in the house, I just told Donna, I can't spend the rest of my life like this. I got to try to figure out a way to try to be better. And even if I don't get better, then I'll know that I've made a bigger effort. I was a former weightlifter, power lifter. And so I went on a complete opposite approach of what the PT was of the time, and started doing a different regimen of heavier weights, lower repetitions to put some bulk back on my legs. And I started riding a stationary bike to be able to get some aerobic training. And I eventually went from an aerobic bike to a regular bike. I started getting stronger and stronger. And like many things in my life, I got a little carried away with it. And and I started riding longer and longer distances. And I went from Dunwoody, Georgia, up to Helen, Georgia. It was it was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life at the time. And as I went across the Chattahoochee River on one leg, because my right leg had cramped up so bad I couldn't pedal for the last 5 miles with both legs. But when I went across the river, I realized how lucky I was that I had had the fortitude and the determination to get better, and that there had to be a lot of people out there that might have given up, and maybe I could do something in cycling that would give them kind of a different perspective and get them to do more than they think they can. And so I got this crazy idea that in that little 100-foot time, I said, what if I rode across the country on a bike? And so then I started researching it and found out that there was a record from Savannah to San Diego. And that became my focus, to try to break that record, which I did in 19. I trained for 3 years. I broke the record in 82, but I knew it was not the best I could have done because I didn't know what I was doing. And so I attempted again in 83 to break my record. I was on a sub 9-day record. I would have crossed the country in probably 8.5 days. I was less than 500 miles from San Diego, and I got blown off my bike by a dust devil, which is a dwarf tornado.
Yeah.
I broke my collarbone and the ride was over. And so in 1984, I set out one more time to break my record. I had the worst weather in the other two crossings I ever had. Headwinds from the time I started to the virtually till 12 miles from San Diego. I got across the country. I broke my record across the country in 11 days, 8 hours, and 15 minutes. Broke my record by over 4 days. And then in 1989, I joined the 4-man team to do the race across America. We went from Los Angeles to New York, 3,000 miles. We crossed the country in 5 days, 1 hour, 8 minutes. It's the fastest crossing of America ever.
It still is. Wow, that's amazing.
And it's the fastest 3,000 miles ever covered under human power.
Wow. And
And both records still stand.
were there any cyclers that people would know? Like, I mean, obviously you, but were there any that were actually cycling in the
In-
big races across,
Then,
France or yeah,
well,
or just a group of guys? Yeah.
our team were all ultra marathon cyclists.
Yeah.
Two brothers, Pete and geez, I can't believe it. Pete Pensears and his brother, whose name I can't even think of at the time, Jim Pensears, and a guy named Bob Forney was on our team. The team that was closest to us in the race across America were 3 Olympic cyclists. There was a guy named Fast Freddy something.
Yeah.
And they had 1 ultramarathon cyclist on the team, and they were confident they were going to beat us.
Yeah. Wow, that's an amazing story. And I know you said the first time you went across was just with your wife and your daughter, And then
Yeah,
you basically, when you said you didn't know what you're doing, but you still did great. And then you probably deployed some technology and a crew, I'm assuming, and that sort of
right.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The first time, like I said, I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't realize about that you can't sleep. You have to just keep staying on the bike. So the next in '83, I had a crew, I had a massage therapist, I had a nutritionist,
Yeah.
I had a mechanic with me. I mean, we had drivers,
Yeah.
and the goal was, to break the record.
Yeah.
We would have if I hadn't crashed.
Yeah. Well, good message for people listening too, to understand like what it takes to be the most prepared for something. So you sold the company for, if I have the number right, around $100 million. And
No, no, we were about 100 million in revenue. Don't mix
okay.
those numbers up. But we
Okay.
did we did just fine.
Okay.
We
You
did just
sold the
fine
company, you did fine.
in
Why did you
1998.
sell? And then how did you move from there to Caribou as the CEO and chair?
Okay, so we sold the company in '98. It was 21 years. I was in the business. I didn't expect to be there more than 5 to 7 years. We were there 21 years. My partner had basically moved to Florida. He was semi-retired. And I got in '96, I got kind of caught up in politics.
Yeah.
Um, I ran against Newt Gingrich for the House. And then in 1998, I ran for the US Senate against Paul Coverdale, who has passed away since, unfortunately. Really, he was a good guy. Um, but I lost both those races. And I was doing a lot of nonprofit work and I was doing some consulting. And because I thought, honestly, in '98, I really was confident I was going to win that race. And I figured I would, have a different path in my life. And when that didn't work out, um, I just, I always thought I would just be very happy retired and go fly fishing and play golf and ride my bike and all that stuff, but it just wasn't enough. And I did a project for a company that had bought Caribou Coffee out of Minneapolis 2.5 years earlier. The company was not doing well. And they hired me to do an analysis as to whether or not they had just made a bad deal. And if so, or whether it was a really good, but whether the brand was worth saving. And if it was, then they would stick with it. If it wasn't, then they would just, cut and run, basically sell the company, get whatever they could out and deploy the money somewhere else. So I did this analysis for them. I went to Chicago, I went to Minneapolis, I went to Washington. They had stores in Atlanta. And I did the worst thing that a consultant can ever do. I fell in love with the brand while
Yeah.
doing this job and figured out why the company was not doing well. But I loved the brand and felt like it could really go up against a company like Starbucks. And so when I came back from my trip, I went to see the the managing partner of the firm that owned it. And I said, I've got good news and bad news. And he said, well, give me the good news first. I said, well, the good news is you don't have to pay my expenses and you don't have to pay for the report. You don't have to pay one penny for it.
This is
And
like the clothing store all over again.
I know. And he said,
There's
and
a
he said,
theme here.
yeah. And he said, well, why is that? And I said, because I'm not giving you the report. And they were like, well, why are you not going to give us the report? Because you've got a management problem. And I said, if I give you the report and you try to get this your CEO to implement it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
I'm just going to say, I'm going to just keep it to myself. However, if you make a change of management, I'd be willing to buy into the company and go up there and get this thing on the right track. And that's what happened. We negotiated for about 3 months. I bought into the company, moved to Minneapolis in January of 2003. And less than 2.5 years after I got there, the company was doing well enough that I was able to take it public on NASDAQ
Yeah.
for a very successful IPO.
And how long did you do that?
I stayed 5 years. That was
5 years.
I would stay 5 years and then I
Yeah.
left, stayed on the board.
We could talk for like 3 hours. I have so many more questions, but let's try to do some lightning rounds. So I want to make sure So I'm reading your book for the second time, and I'm enjoying it just as much as I did the first time. So you talk about sharing life lessons on resilience and leadership. We've talked a lot about that. What motivated you to write the book?
I started out wanting to write the book for my kids because I realized that no matter how many stories I've told my kids about what my life was like growing up or some of the things I'd been through, I wanted to give them something that really talked about where I came from. And so they would have an understanding of perseverance and love of life and all those things that I've learned along the way. And when I started really getting serious about writing it, I realized that maybe the message was bigger than just for my family because I had done a lot of motivational speaking over the years. And almost every time after I got off a stage, someone would come up to me and say, I'd really like to learn more. Do you have a book? And I would be like, well, I'm thinking about writing a book. And I finally got to the point where I just realized that I needed to write this. And so I called Catherine Lewis, who is professor at KSU, Kennesaw State University. And the two of us sat down and got together. And 2.5 years later, we had a book.
So people should pick this up if you haven't done it. You ever thought about putting it on audio too, Michael?
I have. I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah,
COVID kind of took the wind out of the book. It was a book, it still continues to sell pretty
yeah,
well. Um, but I have thought about an audiobook because
yeah.
there's a big demand
There's a
for it.
market for it.
But
Yeah.
one thing I will say to your audience is that all of the royalties from the book go to a scholarship fund at Kennesaw State University to support veterans.
Yeah, the Michael and Donald Coles Veterans Endowment. So you guys have been very philanthropic through your life. So thanks for that. And make sure if you do get time to get tough, you get the right book because there's a couple titles out there like that. And we won't
Yeah.
go into that because I'm
Well, remember, the name of my book is Time to Get Tough: How Cookies, Coffee, and a Crash Led to Success in Business and Life.
right, right. Yeah.
Yeah, the other one is written by Donald Trump.
Yeah, wasn't even going to mention the name. Uh,
Okay.
Not to get into politics. Speaking of politics, you did run and you ran against a couple of really big names. How tough was that to not win?
Well, it was interesting. I would say that by the time I ran in '98, I lost in '96 against Newt.
Gingrich. Yeah.
And then by the time I ran in '98, I had a different perspective of outcome. But in '96, it was a 7.5 month campaign from the time we started.
Yeah.
And when I lost, I called the woman that was running my campaign manager, and I said to her, Kate, I said, all right, what do we do now? And she said, what do you mean, what do we do now? I said, well, what do we do now? I mean, she said, well, I don't know what you're doing now. She said, but I'm going back to Washington. And she said, I suggest you hire a moving company to get all the stuff out of the offices.
Oh, geez.
And it was so foreign to me because in business, when you have a downturn or when
Yeah.
something, you can tweak it, you can figure out how to make it right. But at the end of the day in politics, when the vote is counted, it's over. It's just over. And the hardest part for me were there were so many issues that I got I was passionate before, but when you have thousands of people that are out there working and putting out yard signs and walking around with T-shirts with
Yeah.
your name
Yeah.
on it, and you're talking to the people who the issues directly affect, I couldn't walk away from it, which is why I wound up running for the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd ever run again after Newt, but
Yeah.
I ran. And
Yeah.
then I realized after I lost that as a private citizen, there's a lot of things you can do privately, like
Yeah.
veterans right now,
Yeah.
the scholarship. We can look, I'm not rich enough and the thing's not big enough to help veterans everywhere in the world. But if I can help veterans that are trying to finish their degree at KSU, we're good about that.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I'm going to just end with two more quick questions. So, looking back on your life of many journeys, what are you most proud of? It's not over either. So, you can say, wait, stay tuned.
Well, I'd say the thing I'm the most proud of is my marriage of 52 years,
Yeah. God bless you.
and all the things that, the ups and downs that Donna have been through, not so much financially, but, my motorcycle accident and sticking with me through 4 cross-country, transcontinental bicycle rides, all the things that Donna has put up with me. I'm probably the proudest that she's still around, you
Can
know?
identify with that.
Yeah. And I guess I think that honestly, the thing I'm probably the most proud of is living a righteous life
Yeah.
and not being self-absorbed and
Yeah.
trying to do whatever I can to help others. And yeah, I think that's what I'm the most proud of.
Well, that's so the last thing I always like to ask my guests is if you could leave the listeners with one piece of advice regarding relevant leadership, what would it be?
I've had the opportunity along the way to ask people that very same people that I have come in contact with, and one of them was Colin Powell.
Oh,
I
yeah.
got I got to sit with Colin Powell at a dinner, and as he got up to speak, I just asked myself, I ask you one quick question. I said, "What do you think makes a great leader?" And he turned and he looked at me. He said, "You're a great leader if people will follow you, even if it's only out of curiosity."
Yeah.
And that has really stuck with me. On the other hand, Zell Miller, who was a very good friend of
Yeah.
mine, former Governor Zell Miller, when I talked to him about his first attempt to change the flag, he said when you're leading a change about changing the flag and you look behind you and nobody's there, you realize you're just out for a stroll.
I love that.
and and I mean, I think that leaders um, lead by listening to the
Yeah.
people that they're trying to lead. Because the truth is if I've learned anything in my life, I started out in business world very young, and by the time I was 30, I thought I knew all the answers. And the truth was I did know all the answers. My problem was I didn't know all the
The
questions.
questions.
Yeah, and I learned that I didn't have to be the smartest guy in the room. I didn't have to know all the answers. I had to hire really smart people that we could learn from each other. Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you in the different areas of the business that you need to run. Don't let that intimidate you or make it feel like, it somehow diminishes you. In fact, you're the leader, and they're going to help you look like a great leader because you may brought the right people around you. You can't do this by yourself. You just can't. And I would say that for whatever my career has been worth, one of the things that has made it successful is the fact that I listen. I listen, and I don't just listen. I try to absorb and see
Yeah.
if we're on the right track. And lastly, I have always been customer centric,
Yeah.
always customer centric. And knowing that it's a lot easier to keep a customer than it is to get a new one.
Yeah. Well, Michael, as always, thank you. When next time you come to Atlanta, let me know and we'll try to connect,
We
maybe
will
at a
for
Caribou
sure.
Coffee.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right.
It's
Thanks.
good
Have
to
a good
talk with
trip.
you.
All right. Take
Yeah.
care. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.